Again, Happy New Year. Not like, did I just wake up and it's January 1st already, Happy New Year, because, that happens to me. I'm not talking about the calendar New Year. I am talking about Happy New Church Year. And I think that it is appropriate that Advent is the church's new year because Advent begins with hope. Advent is all about God's promise that the time of salvation is right at hand. A great gift is about to be given to the world. And this gift will transform life. It will herald the coming of God's kingdom. If Advent is about anything, it is about hope. However, unlike most of our calendar New Year celebrations, Advent has its roots firmly planted in the soil of life's struggles. I like what Katie had for us at the beginning. I don't know how many people were able to see the video that was explaining Advent, but I think it did a marvelous job. The Advent hope that I'm talking about, the kind of hope does not rely on blind optimism. It knows deep darkness. It knows endless waiting. It knows pointless suffering. It's familiar with terror and anguish, and it cries out, "Come, Lord Jesus, come." come to our world and make right everything that is wrong. And Advent here's an echo from the heart of God that says, yes, I have heard your cry. The time is at hand. The baby is at the door. I will come to save creation, so please welcome the child. So that's how we're going to spend some of our time this Advent season. We're going to find ways to welcome the child in song, in worship, in word, in prayer, in our time at the table. We are going to welcome the child. Sounds great, right? So with that, let's turn back to this text that I read here in Luke and try to figure out what in the world we're going to do with distress among the nations, confused by the roaring seas and waves, and all the folks who will be fainting from the fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world. I kid you not, we can get serious psychic whiplash from Advent, can't we? It just takes you one direction and pulls you back another direction. It's crazy. I don't know if you've ever watched this, but back in the early 2000s, back in the heyday of reality television, there was a show called Fear Factor. Anybody remember that one? Crazy show. I've seen maybe 2 episodes and clips from other episodes, but the premise of the show was, how do normal people react when forced into situations that most folks would consider scary or dangerous? So the contestants on the show were some of the things that would happen to them is they were dangled from helicopters, they were put in rooms filled with spiders or rodents or something like that, and they were dared to eat food that most people would think was disgusting. Those who chickened out, they lost points for their team. But if a contestant could take it, they would advance. If they couldn't take it, they would withdraw. And so it is with us when we run into real life fear factors. So what's Jesus' solution to dealing with life's fear factor moments? Well, he says, stand up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. It's not a time for playing it safe, not a time for putting your head in the sand, not a time for withdrawal. It's a time for standing tall, for sticking your neck out. Why? Because this time of fear is not happening because God is trying to punish us. Okay? That's what Jesus is saying here, which is kind of a funny thing, because that's not the message we typically hear from some religious leaders today when scary things happen, right? In fact, there are some religious leaders who've gained enough popularity and gained enough of a following and support that they're able to have their own television networks. Can you imagine what First Christian Church Chico would do with their own television network? WLUV, Chico, California, the network for Christians. But some of these preachers who have their own television networks try to convince people that earthquakes are caused by gay marriage rather than sudden shifts in the earth's tectonic plates, right? Jesus said that when we face times of unrest, when we face times of terror, and boy, have we seen our share of that lately, right? When we face these times, we need to redirect our fear to hope. Advent is about the glory of hope. It's about the dawning light after a long, dark, restless night. It is about the promise of coming salvation. It is a season of waiting for the coming of new life. It's about the dawning of peace and justice and reconciliation for all of creation. But Advent knows that we're not there yet. Advent is not this flight into fantasy. The time of Advent is still deeply aware of the sufferings of the world. Advent knows about the frustration of waiting. Advent knows about the times when the light of hope is almost extinguished. And Advent does not ask us to rationalize those times when it all seems pointless, when it all seems like God is maybe even silent. During Advent, we find ourselves in solidarity with the Hebrew people, especially the ones who were in exile in Babylon, or the ones who returned from exile in Babylon to find their promised land in a state of chaos, when they realized that they may never recover those golden years when they were living in prosperity as an independent nation. When they realized that the only way they might be able to live a semi-normal life is by cutting deals with whatever oppressive empire happened to be ruling the land at the time. At Advent, we find ourselves in solidarity with all those generations of the church that have looked to Jesus' imminent return to bring an end to suffering. But they have died in the waiting. At Advent, we ask God serious questions about why it all has to take so long, why suffering must ravage the human spirit, and why we find so few definitive answers. And we cry out the great universal Advent prayer, "Come, Lord Jesus. Please come. Put it right. Make it right. All the stuff in my life and all that is wrong with this world, please come." Sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? Because on one hand, we've got this joyful expectation. And on the other hand, we're in solidarity with people who are going through despair. Again, with the psychological whiplash. Because Advent is a season that speaks to the reality of our world. From international politics all the way down to the intimate struggles of our own lives, we know this paradox between joyful expectation and abject despair. We live in a world of incredible medical miracles, but we can't seem to agree on how to provide adequate health care to the millions who could use these miraculous medical miracles. We live in a world where we've got the technology to eliminate our dependency on fossil fuel, but yet we can't get beyond the complicated system of global politics that could make this happen. We live in a world where we can access and exchange information from these little things all over the world. I can look up just about anything right now on this phone. I can text just about anybody in the world right now. We are more connected to each other than at any time in history, and yet we do not always know how to communicate with each other, right? Then this paradox happens in our personal lives too. We go through seasons of growth when all sorts of new possibilities open up for us, where it seems like any dream that we have is right within our reach. We also have seasons in our lives where we feel appallingly stuck, where we feel limited, where we feel powerless, and then there's nothing we can do about it. Advent picks up the cry of our beings. God, you are our only hope. But why does it all have to take so long? God, have mercy. Come, Lord Jesus. And it's pretty tempting for us to want to avoid that less pleasant half of this seasonal paradox. Mind you, our society avoids it pretty well. We've pretty much turned the whole season and then some into a brightly colored season of tinsel and lights and gluttony and consumerism. And we're okay with that, especially for those of us who have gone through a rough year, a rough 11 months. So bring on the lights, break out the eggnog, pull out the sales flyers, and let's go to town. But like I said last week, Here comes Jesus, old Mr. Paradox, warning us not to let ourselves escape into excess on one hand, but on the other hand, don't let our worry paralyze us and get distracted from welcoming the Christ child. God's affirmations keep coming down through the ages. Your redemption is at hand. Keep watching for those points of light across the eastern sky. Watch and pray. God is more present in this world than we can even imagine. Place your hope in God. Seek God's ways and follow them. This is a season for us to bring our prayer of peace, our prayers for justice, our prayers for salvation to God. To pray for the salvation of the world. It's a season to stand up and lift up your heads. I picked one of my favorite Christmas carols to be our invitation song this morning because for me it resonates with some of these Advent themes that we've been talking about this morning. But it's also an awesome Christmas song too, right? So if you could turn in your red songbooks to number 53, we'll sing "It Came Upon a Midnight Clear."